systematic listing, table, tree diagram, and fundamental counting principle. Yan ang pag-uusapan natin ngayon dito sa ating matsayang talakayan. Kaya, stay tuned! Hello, grade 8 learners! For today's video, we will discuss organizing outcomes of an event and the fundamental counting principles. With the learning competency, counts the number of occurrences of an outcome in an experiment by table, tree diagram, systematic listing, and fundamental counting principle. Let's recall the previous lesson. You have to list the elements of the sample space in each of the following experiment. In flipping a coin, what do you think are the elements of the sample space? If you answered head and tail, then you are correct. So we have here two possible outcomes. How about in rolling a die? What are the elements of the sample space in rolling a die? If you answered 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, then you are correct. And there are 6 possible outcomes. If the experiment is simple, just like flipping a coin and rolling a die, we can easily identify the number of possible outcomes. So, halimbawa, in flipping a coin, we have there 2 possible outcomes. And in rolling a die, we know that there are 6 possible outcomes because we have 6 faces of a die. However, if the experiment is a little more complex, we need to use systematic way or strategy to make sure that all possible outcomes are listed. Now, we are going to discuss the different ways or strategies in counting outcomes. First, we have the systematic listing, tabular form, tree diagram, and fundamental counting principle. So, isa-isahin natin ang mga ito. First is systematic listing. The outcomes for an event can be listed in an organized or systematic way to make sure that none of the possible outcomes is missed out. Titingnan natin lahat ng mga possible outcomes at ililista natin itong mga ito. For example, write all the possible outcomes when an unbiased 2 coins are tossed. When we toss, the outcomes could be 2 heads, head and tail and head, and 2 tails. So we can list down all the possible outcomes. We have here HH, HT, TH, and TT. And there are 4 possible outcomes. Another example. How many ways can a president and vice president be chosen from 5 candidates for president and 5 candidates for vice president? Now, we will let P1, P2, P3, P4, and P5 represent the 5 candidates for president. And we will let V1, V2, V3, V4, and V5 represent the 5 candidates for vice president. So we will now list down all the possible outcomes. Now, we have here P1 and V1, P1 and V2, P1 and V3, P1 and V4, P1 and V5. Or it could be P2V1, P2V2, P2V3, P2V4, P2V5. And it could also be P3V1, P3V2, P3V3, P3V4, and P3V5. It could also be P4V1, P4V2, P4V5, P3, P4V4, and P4V5. And it could be P5V1, P5V2, P5V3, P5V4, and P5V5. So these are all the possible outcomes. Now, how many possible outcomes do we have? Correct. We have here 25 possible outcomes. Let's move on to the next strategy. So we have the tabular form. Tabular form is a way of organizing the outcomes of an experiment using a table. A table of outcomes is a table where the first row and the first column represent the possible outcomes in each event. For example, a coin is tossed and a die is rolled. How many outcomes are possible? Kailangan gumawa muna tayo ngayon ng table. Sa table na ito, ilalagay natin yung mga possible outcomes. Okay, so halimbawa, in tossing a coin, ang possible outcomes natin ay head and tail. And in rolling a die, ang mga possible outcomes natin ay 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Okay, so ang gagawin lang natin to fill up the table is just like multiplication table. So halimbawa, meron ka ditong head and number 1. So ang ilalagay natin dito, we have head and number 2. And then head and number 3. And then head and number 4. Then next is head and number 5. And then next we have head and number 6. Now, dito naman tayo sa tail. Tail and, tapat natin sa number 1. Then we have tail and number 2. Then we have tail and number 3. Then we have tail and number 4. Then we have tail and number 5. We have tail and number 6. So we can also list down all the possible outcomes. So we have here H1, H2, H3, H4, H5, H6, T1, T2, T3, T4, T5, and T6. And how many possible outcomes are there? Correct. So there are 12 possible outcomes. For example, Mr. Cruz loves to read books. He has 3 books of The Lord of the Rings and 7 books of Harry Potter. He can finish 2 books in a day. How many possible outcomes can he read 1 Lord of the Ring book and Harry Potter book in a day? Now, we will let L1, L2, L3 represent the 3 books of The Lord of the Rings. And H1, H2, H3, H4, H5, H6, H7 represent the 7 books of Harry Potter. Now, gagawa tayo ng table. Yung L1, L2, and L3 ilalagay natin sa bawat row. And yung H1, H2, H3, H4, H5, H6, and H7 ay ilalagay natin sa bawat column. Now, to fill up the table, gagawin lang natin is just like multiplication. Okay, so we have L1 and H1. Dito naman, L1, H2. Then we have L1, H3. Then next is L1, H4. Next is L1, H5. Next is L1, H6. And next is L1, H7. Dito naman tayo sa L2. L2, H1. L2, H2, L2, H3, L2, H4, L2, H5, L2, H6, and L2, H7. And on the last row, we have L3, H1, L3, H2, L3, H3, L3, H4, L3, H5, L3, H6, and L3H7. These are all the possible outcomes. Now, how many possible outcomes do we have? Correct. So there are 21 possible outcomes. Next example. Mancardo wants to buy a monitor and CPU to complete his computer showcase from a grand prize in a raffle draw. He can choose from 5 monitors and 1 from 3 CPUs. Determine the number of possible sets that Mancardo can choose from. Now, we will let C1, C2, and C3 represent the 3 CPUs, and M1, M2, M3, M4, and M5 represent the 5 monitors. Now, gawa tayo ng table. C1, C2, and C3, yan yung mga nasa row natin. And M1, M2, M3, M4, and M5, yan yung ilalagay natin sa ating columns. Okay, pwede ring magbaliktad. So, pwedeng sa row, ilalagay yung M1, M2, M3, M4, M5. At sa column, yung C1, C2, and C3. Parehas lang din ang lalabas na sagot. Okay, now, for the possible outcomes, so these are the sample space. The first one, we have C1, M1, C1, M2, C1, M3, C1, M4, and C1, M5. Then we also have C2, M1, C2, M2, C2, M3, C2, M4, and C2, M5. And then C3, M1, C3, M2, C3, M3, C3, M4, and C3, M5. So these are what we call the sample space. Now, how many possible outcomes do we have? Correct. So there are 15 possible outcomes. Now, let's move on to tree diagram. A tree diagram is a visual way to represent the total outcomes you could have. It is a diagram used to show the total number of possible outcomes in probability experiment. So let's have our example. In how many ways can Mang Jose dress up in his vacation if he has 3 shirts? We have blue, red, and yellow, long pants and short pants, and we have 2 pairs of shoes. Let us now construct a tree diagram. So una, ilalagay natin yung unang choices. Meron tayong 3 choices sa shirt, and then meron tayong 2 choices sa pang-ibaba. So ipapares lang natin using arrow. And then meron din tayong 2 choices ng sapatos. Okay, so ganito lang ang paggawa ng tree diagram. Gamit lang ang arrow. And then we are going to select or write the possible outcomes. Okay, on the first possible outcome, we have here blue shirt, long pants, and the first pair of shoes. For the second outcome, we have this one. Then third outcome, fourth outcome, and then next on the red shirt, we have the fifth outcome, And this is the sixth outcome. Seventh outcome. And eighth outcome. Next, we have on the yellow shirt, ninth outcome. 10th outcome. 11th outcome. And the last one, we have the 12th outcome. Now let us see all the possible outcomes. How many possible outcomes do we have? Correct. So there are 12 possible outcomes, meaning there are 12 ways that Mang Jose can wear his outfit. Next example. Mr. Ganinit went to a Filipino restaurant to have his dinner. The menu says adobo, laing, sinigang na baboy, fried chicken, and pinakbet. And for drinks, iced tea, soft drinks, and pineapple juice. How many outcomes can Mr. Ganinit select from if he chooses one food and one drink for his dinner? Now, to see all the possible outcomes, let us construct a tree diagram. So sa unang ulam, meron tayong adobo. Ipapares natin sa tatlong choices ng inumin. So ang first outcome natin ay adobo and iced tea. And then meron tayong adobo and soft drinks and adobo and pineapple juice. The next na ulam ay laing. So paired with iced tea, so meron tayong laing and iced tea, then laing and soft drinks, and laing and pineapple juice. And then sa next na ulam, sinigang na baboy, paired with iced tea, so sinigang na baboy and iced tea. And then we have sinigang na baboy and soft drinks, and we have sinigang na baboy and pineapple juice. And then sa next na ulam, we have fried chicken, so fried chicken and iced tea, fried chicken and soft drinks, fried chicken and pineapple juice. And then, meron tayong pinakbet, pinakbet and iced tea, pinakbet and soft drinks, and pinakbet and pineapple juice. So meaning, Mr. Ganinit could select from 15 possible outcomes. So there are 15 possible outcomes. Next is the fundamental counting principle. The fundamental counting principle is a rule to count all the possible ways for an event to happen or the total number of possible outcomes in a situation. It states that when there are n ways to do one thing and m ways to do another thing, then the number of ways to do both the things can be obtained by taking their product. This is expressed as n multiplied by m. So meaning, multiplication lang ang gagawin natin dito. Let us have our example. How many possible outcomes are there when 6 coins are flipped? So meron kang 6 na coins. Ang bawat isang coin ay meron siyang 2 outcomes. So ito yung head and tail. So to find all the possible outcomes when 6 coins are flipped, so imumultiply lang natin yung 2 ng 6 na beses. Kasi nga sa first coin meron siyang 2 outcomes, sa second coin 2 outcomes din, sa third coin 2 outcomes, sa next coin is 2 outcomes, and then fifth coin is 2 outcomes, and the sixth coin is 2 outcomes. So ang gagawin lang natin, imumultiply natin ng 6 na beses yung 2 by itself. So meron kang 2 times 2 times 2 times 2 times 2 times 2, and that is equal to 64. So meaning, there are 64 possible outcomes when 6 coins are flipped. Next example. A fast food restaurant has a meal special, 299 pesos for a drink, sandwich, side item, and dessert. The choices are, for sandwich, we have grilled chicken, all beef patty, veg burger, and fish fillet. For the side item, we have regular fries, cheese fries, and potato wedges. And for the dessert, we have chocolate chip cookie or apple pie. And then for the drink, we have pineapple juice, iced tea, Coke, Diet Coke, and Sprite. So tingnan natin ilang choices meron sa sandwich. So we have 1, 2, 3, and 4. Sa side item, meron tayong 3. Sa dessert, meron tayong 2. And sa drinks, meron tayong 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So ang tanong, how many meal combos are possible? Okay, so kailangan natin yung number o yung bilang ng choices natin sa bawat item. So there are 4 different types of sandwich. Meron kang 3 types ng side item. Meron kang 2 types ng dessert. At saka 5 types ng drinks. So ang gagawin lang natin is imumultiply lang natin itong mga to. So we have 4 times 3 times 2 times 5. And there are 120 possible combinations ng meal. Next example. A new shirt is released in 4 different colors and 5 different sizes. How many different color and size combinations are available to the public? So meron tayong choices sa colors na red, blue, green, and yellow. So meron kang 4. And sa sizes, meron kang small, medium, large, XL, double XL. So meron kang 5 sizes. So ang gagawin lang natin is to multiply the choices natin ng color and yung choices natin sa sizes. So for the number of possible colors, meron kang 4. Number of possible size, meron kang 5. At para makuha natin yung number ng possible combination is we just multiply 4 and 5. So we will get 20. Meaning, there are 20 different color and size combinations available to the public. Subukan naman natin ang mga numbers. So using the digits 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9, how many 3-digit numbers can be formed without repetition of digits? Pag sinabing without repetition, walang pwedeng maulit. Okay, so let us have 3 boxes which represents the 3-digit numbers. So yung una, meron tayo dyan na ones digit, tens digit, and hundreds. So ito yung ones, tens, and hundreds. So pag maglalagay tayo ng number dito sa ones, ilan ang choices natin? Okay, so mula 1 hanggang 9. So there are 9 choices. Okay, pag nailagay na natin yung isang number dito sa ones digit natin, ilan naman ang natitirang numbers na pagpipilian natin sa tens digit? So, halimbawa, natanggal na yung isa dito. So, ilan na lang? Meron kang 8 choices. Now, dahil nailagay mo na yung 2 numbers sa ones at saka sa tens, so ilan na lang ang natitirang choices natin para sa hundreds. Okay, so meron na lang tayong 7. Now, so the total number of 3-digit numbers can be formed, so we have 7 times 8 times 9, and that is equal to 504. So meaning, there are 504 three-digit numbers which can be formed without repetition using 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. Now, using the same digits, how many three-digit numbers can be formed with repetition? Okay, so ibig sabihin naman ngayon, yung mga digits natin ay pwedeng maulit. So let's say meron tayong 3-digit numbers dito. Sa first digit, meron tayong 9 na choices. Sa second digit, dahil pwedeng maulit, meron pa rin tayong 9 na choices. At sa third digit, dahil pwedeng maulit, meron pa rin tayong 9 na choices. So to get all the possible outcomes, we will just simply multiply 9 times 9 times 9. So therefore, we have 729 numbers can be formed with the given digits. Using the same digits, how many three-digit even numbers can be formed without repetition? Okay? So, kailangan natin dito ay 3-digit even number. Okay, so yung 3 boxes na to represents the 3-digit numbers. Dahil even number yan, kailangan it ends with 2, 4, 6, and 8. Yun ang mga choices natin sa ones digit. So sa ones digit, how many choices? We have 4. Again, ito yung mga 2, 4, 6, and 8. Now, dahil sabi niya without repetition, pagdating natin sa tens digit natin, hindi na necessary na yan ay 2, 4, 6, 8. So, we will consider all the numbers. Pero since nailagay na natin yung isa sa ones digit, meron na lamang tayong 8 choices. Okay? And then, for the hundreds digit, so dahil nailagay na natin yung dalawa, ang natitirang choices na lamang natin doon ay 7. Okay, so to get all the possible outcomes, imumultiply lang natin itong mga to. So 7 times 8 times 4 is equal to 224. Let's consider another example. 3 cards are drawn in succession and without replacement from a deck of 52 cards. Find the total number of ways in which the 3 cards can be dealt. Okay, kailangan natin dito ng 3 cards. Okay, so from 52 cards, kukuha daw tayo ng 3 cards without replacement. So, ibig sabihin, sa unang kuha natin ng card, meron kang ilang choices. Tama, meron kang 52 choices. Now, kung kukuha ka ulit para sa second card, ilang choices na lang ang natitira? Okay, correct. Meron kang 51. And dahil nakuha mo na yung dalawa, sa next na kuha natin ng card, ilan na lang ang natitirang choices? Okay, so meron tayong 50. So, ang gagawin lang natin is imumultiply lang natin itong mga to. 52 times 51 times 50. And there are 132,600 ways in which 3 cards can be dealt. To sum up our lesson, a coin is tossed and a die is rolled. How many outcomes are possible? So we can show it in systematic listing, tabular form, tree diagram, or the fundamental counting principle. So there are 12 possible outcomes when a coin is tossed and a die is rolled. And now it's your turn. Get your paper and pen and do this activity. And that's for today, guys. Do not forget to like, subscribe, and share. Again, this is Teacher Dali na nagsasabing, practice makes perfect. Thanks for watching!